This is AOS Shorts. Get better fast. Hello and welcome to another show of AOS Shorts. Today is the first in a new series that I'm starting called the Masterclass. So this is an opportunity to have a series of interviews with really top tier competitive match play Age of Sigmar gamers and find out what makes them tick. The aim is to focus on what thoughts they go into when preparing for a tournament, when writing a list, and at the tabletop and in-game. So who do I have up first? Today I'm joined by Tony Moore, successful Team England captain at the inaugural AOS Six Nations, currently third in the UK rankings, holding icons for Best Death Player, Disciples of Tzeentch Player, and, surprisingly, Spiderfang Grotz. Tony has done 15 tournaments in the last year, winning Aegon Firestorm 4s, second at Facehammer and Blackout, fourth at the X Grand Slam, sixth at the GT Grand Final, and soon to be off to show the Yanks how to play at the LVO. So great to have you on, Tony. Absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, and I don't know how I'm going to follow that now.
We'll start from there and just see how the conversation goes. So, as I was saying in the introduction, this is hopefully an opportunity to talk with you about your approach to the game. For me, I'm always very interested in what people think about when they're playing. I'm one of these players where I don't get a lot of time to play a lot of games due to work and family life and things like that. So what I spend my time doing when I'm daydreaming at the desk or on the bus to and from work is thinking about the game, thinking about meta, thinking about building lists, thinking about strategies, how to perform on the tabletop. Because I've got to, for my own benefit, I have to do all of that preparation so that when I do get to go to a tournament, it doesn't take me 3 games to remember how to play again or how to use my list. So I'm interested in covering off with you 2 things, really. First half of the show, basically talking about what happens before the tournament. So how you write a tournament army list, what you take into consideration, what other preparation that you do leading up to a tournament. And then second half of the show, when you're at the table, what do you take into account when you're dealing with deployment, when you first encounter your opponent's army list? What are your considerations when you're deciding your game plan? And then basically how you execute that as you go through the game. So does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Excellent. So let's start at the top. What do you take into account, or how do you write a tournament army list?
So for me, there's sort of 3 broad areas, and that's your board presence, and that can be filling up space, blocking lanes, etc. The offensive output and the resilience. So you want to have, to my mind, a little bit of all 3, and if something can fit a leg into 2 camps, then all the better. I use my recent Tzeentch army. So the board presence really comes from the pink horrors, who can obviously then turn into blues and then brimstones. So that's a guarantee that they're going to be there wherever I put them in some way, shape or form. The offense, they are magic users. They shoot, it's 4s and 4s, but it's surprising how many wounds that chips off. And then the resilience that comes from the splitting. So they're a perfect unit that fits all 3 roles in the way I think about things. And then after that, you've got to have the resilience around the offensive pieces. So the Lord of Change, Kairos in my current list. How do I protect them? And then it's all about board positioning and blocking those lanes off, and knowing that I've got the redundancy in those blocks to survive.
Very interesting. Those are sort of 3 common themes that you see when you talk to players. Horrors are, as you say, just great for ticking so many of those boxes in one simple battle line unit.
Yeah.
there's a couple of interesting things that I pick up from that, which is one, the offensive piece is that when you're thinking about the offensive output for your army, do you have a view on what is a sort of optimal? Is there such a thing as an optimal number of offensive threats? Like you see people talk about, well, generally you want to have 3 offensive threats because you want to be able to put pressure on your opponent at different parts of the board, or you want to have redundancy should they mortal wound off one of your key threats early on. Do you have a view on that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I think if I go back to sort of Six Nations and before when I was running Death, 3 sort of big offensive pieces is probably about right. The beauty with the Tzeentch, of course, is that anything in the army can be an offensive threat, be it the mortal wound output, be it the sort of high volume of low level shooting. So your offenses spread quite thickly through the whole list. Part of the reason why I think I'm enjoying using it so much.
The other thing that I was going to pick up on from your trifecta, as it were, of board control, offensive output, and defensive resilience, was that touching on board control and resilience with horrors and splitting is, I haven't had a chance to look up the list that you took to the GT Grand Final, or some of your more recent Tzeentch lists, but how do you play that split in terms of how much room do you leave yourself in reinforcement points for the subsequent splitting to blues and brimstones, etc.?
I can roughly run through the list. So it's Kairos, Lord of Change, Herald, Blue Scribe, Changeling. They're my 5 demon heroes, and then you've got the Gaunt Summoner as well. 3 units of 10 pinks, 2 units of 10 blues, and 30 brimstones in 1 unit. And with the Change Host, that leaves 140 summoning. So that gives me 2 options. One is the Gaunt Summoner can jump on a vortex, which allows me to sort of reach out and deal with big blocks. So things like Bone Splitters, Murder Hosts, etc. He's in his element. If you're playing something like yes, it could be 240 points and you'd still take him for that matchup, I think. But 120 when you're playing something like Stormcast or Deathlord, Soulblight, where you've got low model, high impact, then you're better off saving that 100 points for the Vortex for the splitting into blues. In my experience, I would say I probably get the Vortex out in 3 out of 5 games, something like that. And then the other 2, the Vortex stays at home, and that 100 points is basically blue horrors.
It's great that you've got the flexibility to, as you say, when you're facing a horde army, to summon that Balewind as and when needed.
Yeah, because as I say, if you're playing against Stormcast being a great example, little 5-man units, he's not really adding an awful lot up on top.
No, it's wasted 100 points.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. What I was going to sort of touch on next was, do you consider you've got a particular play style? Are you a more offensive player, a more defensive, grind out kind of player, or sort of a bit of both, mixed arms?
Somewhere in the middle. I don't necessarily think of it as offensive and defensive, but active and reactive players. And I'm in the reactive camp. So some people will have a plan and they'll say, right, in turn 1 I'm going to be here, and then they're going to do that, and in turn 2 I'll do this. And it flows out. But as soon as that double turn doesn't go your way, or those dice rolls don't go your way, you're suddenly on the back foot because you've got to reevaluate everything. So I try and be a lot more fluid and react to what my opponent's doing. There's key themes. So I'm playing against a Murder Host. Well, I know I need to take the linchpin out to stop the movement, because that's a big advantage. So that's my only goal, and I'll put whatever effort I need to achieve that, and then sort of reassess once that has been completed. So I tend to be more reactive, of offensive and conservative. I'd guess probably in the more conservative camp, though.
It's interesting that categorization into active and reactive, because it seems to me that there's a continuum, and you do all your preparation up to the tournament, and you list that you've got to have some sort of game plan when you're at the table, but then effectively almost all bets are off, because we aren't playing a game which can be ruthlessly math hammered. I, for one, certainly aren't in the camp where I can think 3 turns ahead in this game, because unlike 8th edition, we don't have certainty of turn order. We've got the priority roll, so there is that. You've got to be, as you say, really good at that reactive element to deal with situations as they arise.
Yeah.
So I like that categorization of active and reactive.
Thank you. That's the way I see that. I'll give you sort of a prime example, because reactive can be deemed almost defensive. And I was playing against Terry Pike, whose Kairos Fate Weaver crutch I've stolen of late. But he's known me as a very defensive, reactive player. I was playing him at an event down in Bristol. Must be going back a good year or more. I could probably tell you. I write them all down. But I knew what he was expecting, the way he set up, so I just went completely offensive and reacted to that and completely threw him off his game. And it's that reactive element as opposed to, I know I have to do this, and this is how the game goes.
Yeah, it's great when you. It's great telling us about it.
Obviously, yeah.
It's great when you've got such a close knit tournament scene where you do have regular opponents, and so you get that additional layer, which is I know how this guy plays, so I'm going to change my strategy in order to deal with how he plays and how he plays the game. The other thing I was going to say was, when you write army lists and you're at that sort of army creation stage, do you find that you do that through a sort of math hammer lens, or are you doing it based on a gut feel and instinct based on how many games you've played, sheer amount of play testing? Where do you think that sort of balance sits within you?
I am well in experience and gut instinct side of that. I think there's an almost emotional level of the way I build lists as opposed to a mathematical, analytical way.
Do you believe that there's something in this concept of fit? That there's a sort of army list that fits you, so based in terms of how you play and what you're looking for in a list? Because I imagine that there are sort of a set of top-tier tournament army lists which are going to be around the top tables. But if you were to divvy up those armies and then give that army and that list to another top player, even though they're a top player, they may not get the same results from that list because it doesn't fit them. It doesn't fit their play style or how they approach the game.
Oh, massively. I mean, if you gave me Bone Splitters or a Corn Murder Host, I'd be rubbish. There's not really much subtlety in that. I prefer sort of the dancing and the movement and the counterbalancing, that side of things. No shock. I have played Wood Elves in old editions of Warhammer and Dark Elves, so that'll give you an idea of the play style that I preferred back then as well.
It's a great play style. Dance, 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 pew, 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 run away.
Absolutely. Until I get Nagash out, and then all bets are off because you want him wading in when you've spent near as half your army on him. Other than that, yeah, dancing and yeah.
Tim Lind, one of our local tournament players from Hamilton's, similarly a big fan of Nagash. Just wishes he gets him out more.
Yeah, I mean, I took him down to South Coast GT, finished 30th, but picked up the best death trophy. So he had a good run for that one.
I think there might be, with GHB2, there might be something in the Nagash plus minimum battle line plus huge reinforcement pool list that we will see. Getting slightly off topic.
That's slightly, that was pretty much my list, although I added, as was, Isabella von Karstein and the baby Manfred, so which gave him some more spells in his arsenal to take advantage of that side. But and then the rest was all summoning. So yeah, that's the way I played him.
Very good. The only other thing I was going to say about fit was I seem to remember that under ATHED there was a tournament in Australia, a relatively small tournament, that had, as one of the rounds, was an army swap, because it was a close group of mates who go to the same tournament regularly. Then they would have an army swap, and it would just be sort of names in a hat. Pull out a name, and that was the army that you were going to be playing that round. I think it would be an interesting concept to try, but of course you've got to have a lot of trust in mates pushing your models around.
Yeah, we've done that on small. We call it WTF, as in Warhammer Trading Forces.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, we've done that as like little Christmas events and things like that in the past. It's quite entertaining. Although we always did it, you played with your army, against your army, and next to your army, so you were never too far away from your models.
That's a good way of dealing with it. It'd also actually be a good opportunity, because if you're playing against your army, you're acting with the knowledge that you have of that army. If you're playing next to your army, then you can see someone else using your army, and you might learn a thing or two with a fresh perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And experience on the tables, priceless in that respect.
I was going to touch on one last thing in terms of the list building aspect, which was, how has General's Handbook 2017 impacted your approach to list building? What are the things that, if you were talking to a match play gamer looking to improve their game, what are the things that they need to be taking into account when writing a list under the new General's Handbook? So that's effectively a question I've asked in two parts. One, your own personal reflection, and two, sort of advice for other players.
Okay, so from personally, I was starting to pick up Tzeentch before it hit, and I think broadly my list has come out smelling of roses, really. So I've tinkered around the edges, but the core has survived relatively intact. One Lord of Change became Kairos. The pinks got a bit cheaper, but broadly, I'm in a good place. I think the scenarios are close enough to the old ones that it's not like learning a new game.
Yeah.
So in terms of my approach, for me, I look at the scenarios. What do you need to hit to win those scenarios? Is it heroes, monsters, bodies? 20-man units, as now is, hence the 30-man unit of Brimstones that's now in my list that wasn't previously. And I just think Tzeentch specifically has weathered the storm better than some others. I think the one-drop lists are pretty much done. Mine's a 3. That seems to be the consensus of about the smallest you can get, and put enough stuff on the table with the increase in the formations. The big formations are pretty much gone. I would say if you can get a 2, 3, 4 drop, go for it. If you can't do that, then it broadly doesn't matter how many drops you get. Go for your life, and MSU or multiple small units is absolutely fine. If you've got 13 drops, it doesn't make any difference playing against 3 drops for that first turn choice. If you've got 8 drops, 13 drops, it's not going to make a massive difference in most scenarios. So go for it and sort of fill your boots.
Yeah, it's interesting, really interesting that that deployment consideration, because, as you say, if you're going to have 13 drops, or if you're not going to have 2, 3, 4 drops, then you might as well have as many as you can, because you can then control what's going to be on the board when your opponent is making choices. So you're going to see where their key pieces are before you get to place your threats. It's the good old put down 4 pieces of chaff and then start laying down anything else that you actually care about.
Yeah, I think that's almost the 2 approaches. It's keep it tidy and get that first go, or spread it out and then I guess you can be more reactive, which is sort of goes in the face of what I said earlier. But there we go. That's that's the 2 camps I'd say in terms of list design at the moment.
In terms of looking at the ways that you achieve that 2, 3, 4 drop army within the battle tome armies, because of course there's issues with non-battle tome armies in terms of disparity between the lists. But in terms of battle tome armies, do you think some are in a better position than others, given availability of battalions and the pricing and cost of that? Because there seems to be, at least to me, quite a bit of variety between those armies. So some have got access to cheaper battalions or not so expensive battalions that are going to allow them to control that choice of deployment.
No, I think everything's got something that is usable to bring the choices down of the new style books. What are we talking? Everything pretty much from Flesh Eaters onward. I've got viable low drop count armies, as you say, when you start going into the Grand Alliance, death. That's where it gets a little bit more. Your choices are a lot more limited. I think all the Bone Splitters can do it. Flesh Eaters can. Obviously, the Tzeentch can both. I've got good battalions that are reasonably priced for what they do. I think it's more old v new on that front.
Yeah, I think the only one that sort of stands out for me as being at the costly end of the spectrum, and this is just from discussions with people I know who play them, because I don't have personal experience of playing them, but that's Stormcast. So Stormcast have got a huge variety of 1 options and 2 battalions. But it seems that those are a very high cost point for those battalions and what you get, unless you commit to doing Jack Armstrong, Vanguard Wing, and paying you 200 points for that.
Yeah, and I played Ricky Me last round at Blackout, which was streamed actually through Firestorm. But he was running Skyborn Slayers. Sort of
interesting,
bit of an old school list.
It's a throwback.
It obviously, he'd won 4 games before we met, so he's obviously having a good run with that. We played that in Star Strike, so I'm not sure that's necessarily the best one for him. And that they didn't drop quite how he could capitalise on them. But so I think they're all right. It was an interesting list that he used, and it's the kind of thing that keeps you guessing. What it did do, it allowed me to take out the Venator turn 1 at no return. And then able to sort of deal with the pieces that were on the board before the army was. So that was an advantage from that point of view. Although I did have a 6 in the Destiny dice, so the Star Fated Arrow was never going to do anything anyway.
I'd be interested. I must try and find out how much Ricky went, because one of the things that I love about Age of Sigmar, and was very different to how I played armies under 8th edition and before, was I just loved the mobility the sheer options and mobility that you get on the tabletop. I'm a Sylvaneth player, and the ability to deploy out of the woods or teleport all over the show and shenanigans with some of the deployments is great, and it's one of the factors that I love the game. So I'd be interested to see how Ricky goes with went with paladins, etc., which will drop, but then aren't slow to move from there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. So he had the Relictor in there. So he had the Chariot.
Good old Lightning Chariot. Yep.
Yeah. He had, what else did he have? Celestant, Castellant, and then the rest was pretty much the formation. 10 Protectors, 10 Decimators.
Yeah. 10 Decimators. Nice. Horde meta.
Yeah, they almost killed some Brimstones, I think.
Hilarious. Okay, the final sort of question on the sort of preparation side of things was, outside of writing the list, how do you go about preparing for a tournament?
Read the pack.
Sound advice.
This is quite a novel idea. Yeah. I tend to be the organizer of our little group. So, in terms of booking tickets, hotels, etc., the more mundane stuff, that tends to fall on my shoulders. But in terms of the pack, what I'm really looking at is any additional rules that the TO's built in. So, can hidden models claim and contest? Relevant to the changeling? Is there any other tweaks that would affect, my fellow gamers at the club? I can say, actually, bear in mind there's a wound count in this pack, or there's a maximum unit size in that pack. So we've had scenarios where that has had an impact in terms of what they're doing as well. So just read the pack, get your head around where it's at, any special rules, and then off you go.
Solid advice. Out of interest, do you prepare a cheat sheet or notes or anything like that for use at the tabletop, or is it all in your head?
So I've printed off spell cards for the Tzeentch. So every spell has got a little like Magic the Gathering. A guy did it on the TGA forums. So they're brilliant. They're just little magic cards in a little fold, and they sit next to the models. And then on the table, I put at the start of the hero phase, I put beads next to each model for each spell they cast, and then take them away as I go, just so I keep things clear in my head that way. Everything else I just write down. I've got a book that I write down everything in. So who I've played, what they've got, any one-use items go in there. So the Kairos, the Herald 3d6 spell, my summoning pool, Destiny dice, etc. So it all goes in the book. And I've got notes of every game I've played of AOS, which is quite interesting to look back on at the end of every year when I sort of have a look as to what I want to do going forward.
Must be an invaluable resource.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
I say that without any cynicism, as I have a similar book. I also, ashamed to admit it, I actually have one in my day job for court appearances, representing clients, not sitting in the dock myself. Because it's quite useful to reflect back on things, and perhaps once we get towards the end of the show, I'll ask you about how you reflect on games and lessons learned, and how you then incorporate them. But in terms of perhaps now is a good opportunity to move to the tabletop. So we're at the tournament, done all that work up to that point. You got the draw, and let's say it's round 2. So you've already played a game. You got the draw, turn up at the table, look across the table, you see your opponent and their army. Mm-hmm. What's the process that you go through at that stage of the game?
Say hello, introduce yourself, just check I've got the name right.
I assumed you were going to be a pleasant gent, but
but no, I mean, it's a social contract in the old bunny years. You're both there to enjoy yourself, and as much as once the dice rolls, you're both in it to win. You'd hope that you both enjoy the experience. So, that side of things is important. What I'll then do is ask them to go through their list. I'll ask if they've got any once per game items or abilities, because I'll make a note of those so I can cross them off when they've been used. I'll go through my list. At the moment, I'll make sure, if you read the FAQs, you understand the difference now in the change host and the changelings specifically. They've had big updates, and I'll make sure they understand how the splitting of horrors works. Ask them if they've got any questions.
I'm sure that's very valuable for most players, given many won't be up to speed with that change if they don't play Tzeentch often.
Yeah, and I'm sure down the line I'll be like, no, just shut up now, I've got it. Go through the scenario, just make sure that I've got it right in my head. Is it 3 inches or 6 inches to the objective? Is it most bodies? Is it heroes? Does that unit trump that unit, etc.? And then what do we do then? And then we roll for the mysterious terrains. Then we roll for sides, and then sort of off we go from there.
Great. So you're obviously running Tzeentch, or have been running Tzeentch recently. So when you're looking at your opponent's army, what are you looking for in terms of threat assessment? What are the things that you go, right, well, this is what I'm going to have to take out first, or this is going to be the thing that'll scupper my game plan, or are there other things that you're looking for?
Yeah. So the first thing I'm looking for is there a linchpin model or unit? I.e., Bloodsecrator banner, the murder host, the boss of the murder host, a fellow Lord of Change in their change host, a model or thing that makes the whole thing tick. That's priority one. After that, I'm then looking at, well, what reach have they got that can get over my lines of pinks, blues, and brimstones and hit my important pieces, which is broadly my heroes. And they become sort of priority 2 in a way. If I can't get to 1, I'll work on 2. But that tends to be the sort of the process that I go through in my head. Skyfires. Okay, well, they've got a 40-inch threat. Can I keep all my heroes safe? Probably not. So in this game, I'll be wanting to spread out a wee bit more than I would normally. At this stage, I'm also looking at how many drops they've got to my 3. Can I dictate who goes first or not? If I can go first, I can deploy more aggressively. If I can't, you're forced then to prepare for the fact that they might give you the first turn and risk the double. So somewhere between complete defense and the ability to actually do something in turn 1.
I was going to ask, in terms of deployment with your current list, do you prefer to deploy, if you've got the opportunity to take first turn, do you prefer to take first turn or give it to the opponent?
I have no preconception on it. I'll look at each on its merit. So I'll give you an example. Against the murder host, you've got that one model to kill. They're 2d6 inches further forward before the game starts. And that guy's got 8-9 wounds. I can kill that on my turn 1 and be reasonably safe. So I would play to take the first turn in that scenario. Take it, kill the piece, come back, and then sort of reassess from there.
Yeah, certainly know that position. I found myself at one tournament facing a very hard matchup with my Sylvaneth against a heavy Tzeentch list. Lord of Change, lots of Skyfires, lots of horrors. Can't remember exactly the formations, but it was under GHB1. It's the one where you've got the sort of the leader, Zangor Shaman, which can regenerate Destiny dice. And I just took the play, which was, well, I'm going to have to deploy aggressively, take first turn, throw everything at that one Shaman. And it was in 3 places of power. So take out that Shaman, take out as much of the others as I could, and then just try and sit back and weather.
I mean, I suppose just the only other thing I'd add to that, a lot of those decisions are made before you know what your Destiny dice are. So, if you're playing, Sylvanus, a good example. If I've got a number of 5s and 6s in there, sort of 3 or 4, even if I've deployed aggressively, I may let them go first because I can absorb some of the, the bow shots. I can guarantee I'm going to save 3 or 4 of those on the big guys. But you can't make that decision until you've rolled the dice.
Yep.
So, again, that comes to being reactive in a play style.
It's an interesting game mechanic position, that. Because I feel people sort of skip over that almost that order of operations at the beginning of the game, but a lot of that impacts tournament play in terms of, from a Sylvanus perspective, the timing of when the wood goes down and when you pick sides and when you roll Mysterious Terrain. Tzeentch, as you say, when you roll your Destiny dice. So those sort of little things which people don't think about, but top gamers like yourself do think about because it affects deployment and various other aspects.
And if you don't get any ones, you might want to put the blues further forward, but you can't because you've already deployed. It's no use letting the pinks absorb it if you've not got a 1 to guarantee you're going to bring some back. So, but yeah, that's the way the dice is roll, isn't it?
What I was going to say, so we sort of covered deployment. So moving into the game, one of the biggest factors with Age of Sigmar is obviously the priority roll. So when you're in game, apart from that sort of first turn priority roll, but how do you take into account the priority roll? How does it affect your gameplay? How do you factor it into the positioning of your units when you decide that you're going to push, when you decide that you're going to hold back? What are the factors which go into your decision making there?
I always assume I'm going to lose the priority roll, and I always assume that if they win it, they'll take it. So I approach that in my mind, I guess, with quite negative connotations, but I think I went something like, 28 priority rolls and didn't win one on the bounce at the start of the year. Just one of those things, you start to think, come on, this isn't average. So I assume I'm always going to lose it. So I always play that I need 2 lines to protect me because they are going to have 2 turns. So I'm always thinking in that. Yeah. So I mean, the horror splitting thing is phenomenal for this. Of course. If you've got a few 1s there, well, actually, you can guarantee almost that you can keep some pinks alive and grow some back. But yeah, I always assume I'm going to lose it and plan for that. And if I ever win one, then it's quite a nice, pleasant surprise. Although I have occasionally done that, and I've ended up leaving Kairos that's more than 18 inches away because I've played it slightly too defensive. Obviously, the change host allows you to react quite well because you just swap pieces around so that they are in range. But poor Kairos often gets left just out of the way, unfortunately.
Well, he's a slightly old, or very old, slightly crazy chicken. So it's playing to form that he gets left behind.
He is. He didn't see that one coming, that's what it is.
interesting. I always find that priority, how you deal with that, very interesting. And there's different play styles. You seem to reflect that old adage of plan for the worst, but sort of be in a position that you can then take advantage of it if you do get the role. As opposed to pushing for it and then finding that you might be exposed. And it's quite useful that with Tzeentch, as you say, you've got those abilities to then take advantage if you find yourself out of position with change host and some of the reach and range of your other units. One of the questions that I've got is, how do you play, or this is probably in a couple of parts, but do you think you've currently got any bad matchups on the tournament scene in the UK in terms of list styles? And then when you're faced with a bad matchup, how do you find your gameplay goes? How do you change how you're playing when you're facing a bad or a hard matchup?
Okay, so the worst thing for Tzeentch is a strong shooting phase followed by a strong combat phase, because the lines get burnt through twice as quick. So if you leave a row of blues and they get shot off, then they're one line further ahead than they would be if it was a pure melee or a predominantly shooting army. So bone splitters don't have a very... Although I did win against bone splitters for the first time at the GT final, so maybe I've broke the back of that one. But overlords is another one. They come in, they shoot, they can shoot wherever they like.
Yeah.
From a Sylvanus point of view as a whole, I think it favours me as a matchup. But the reach and the range of the bows and the Kurnoth hunters, that's sort of threat number one when I'm playing against those. So it's really that where you've got mixed arms is probably wrong, because if it's balanced arms, I tend to be okay. But if you've got a very strong shooting and a very strong combat contingent, that tends to be, as I say, that they burn through your lines twice as quick as one or the other. So I prefer polarized lists to play against. The other one, surprisingly, is Gutbusters, the old ogres, because they're all 4 wounds. So your battle shock's not really doing an awful lot. So it's quite hard to chew through those chaps.
Yeah, I seem to remember when AOS first came out that it was just large units of ogres with reliable, consistent damage output, large number of wounds. Just push it forward and start hitting people.
Yeah. I don't think they're necessarily as good in scenario play. But yeah, generally to chew through them is quite hard work. 6 of them, that's a fair whack of wounds, fair whack of board control. Your gaunt summoners aren't going to do an awful lot. Even Gateway's killing 1.5 on average. That's not even a failed battle shock. So that sort of list is quite dicey as well.
Yeah. So you sort of touched on the things which you consider are difficult matchups. How do you then modify your play style in order to deal with that bad matchup? Just trying to think of, I think what separates a really great player from just a good or an average player is that when the circumstances go against them, they can scrap and they fight and they push hard, and they will turn what looks like a negative situation for them into a win. So what goes through your mind, and how do you play when you're facing a bad matchup?
So the first thing is, what's the scenario? Because good or bad matchups, if you're playing the scenario and then you don't necessarily have to worry so much about what they're doing. You're playing Overlords on, it's now Duality of Death. Okay, so they've got maybe 15 wounds in heroes and a boat. I can deal with 15 wounds of heroes, a boat, sniper point somewhere.
Yep.
And win on scenario, even if I lose all my men. So your mindset has to just flip to, okay, I'm not playing the army now, I'm playing the scenario. And you try and mitigate what you're losing as you go, so that you can just always keep your eyes on the main prize, which is winning the scenario.
Interesting. Thinking about scenarios where you might be just fighting for that minor victory, do you take into account conserving points? Like one of the old fantasy tropes was sort of if you're losing, well, you're going to conserve points so you don't go down too badly, which resulted in extremes of running units off into the corners of the boards and various things like that. We probably don't have it to that extreme in AOS, but do you find that there's an element of actively thinking about conserving points, withdrawing from combats, things like that, if you're pushing for that minor victory?
I retreat from combat all the time anyway. Horrors don't necessarily survive massively long, so if it gains me another turn of keeping something away, I retreat all the time anyway. But no, I'll always play for the mission. I never play for a minor win because that's just not in my DNA.
Good man.
Yeah, just play like you've got a pair to nick a horde's phrase.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. The thing that I was thinking to ask was, so after the game, after the game or after the tournament, you've got all your notes in your book. Do you go through any sort of post-game analysis before preparing for the next tournament or reflecting on things you've learned?
Yeah, I've got to. So when I went to Blackout, I gave the Gaunt Summoner the Wind Charm, which doubles movement for a turn. And I found because he was going on the Vortex, I wasn't using it at all, so I flipped that to Soul Draft, which gives him a better magic phase. So that's because I wrote it down. And I'm looking, I'm thinking, well, I didn't put a line through that. So, right, okay, let's go back to the book. Let's see what else is around. And so the Soul Draft come up and like, okay, so on the Vortex turn, he's casting 3 spells, 3 dice discarding the lowest. Actually, that's really robust, especially if the blue scribes are around to give him rerolls as well. So yeah, I'll always sort of tinker around the edges. Although I try and keep the core of what I'm doing the same, at least until I've proven that it works or not works to myself.
And that's great advice. One of the things that I'm certainly going to take away from this show is that discipline of writing down the use of items and then sort of ticking them off as you go. Because so I've got my cheat sheet of sort of things I'm going to remember in each stage, and my war scrolls on one page, so I can give it across to my. But one thing that I don't do is I will often not record when I've used units. I'll remember it in the game, but I won't then have the opportunity at the end of a tournament to go back and go, actually, these are the things that I used often, and these are the ones that I didn't.
Yeah. So it just means, if you kind of like, I don't know, I've got this item and it's come up once in 6 games, maybe I'll find something that might work in 5 out of 6 instead. So, yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. So I just have sort of a couple of questions to sort of round out the show. One is, what's the best tactics or strategy advice you would pass on to a player wanting to improve their tournament performance? So what's the single biggest thing that's going to move the dial for someone looking to improve at a tournament?
Play games. Don't make rash decisions on your list design. Give it a go. over a period. That could be a single tournament. It could be, a couple of months gaming at the club. And as I say, tinker around the edges, but keep the core broadly the same. As the meta moves and things change, the Gaunt Summoner has now come in to the heart of the list because, the tournament scene is moving. That most armies have some element of big units, so he's now priceless. But yeah, just play games as much as you can. And for me personally, I write notes on bits and pieces, and then read the pack. If you go into an event, don't get caught out. No one wants to win or lose by a gotcha. So just make sure you know exactly what's going out. And then my only last thing on that is ask someone for help. I'm quite fortunate. I've got a few close friends that we'll talk for hours just on list design and tinkering around the edge sort of mentality, and what's the best use of that 120 points? Is it that or is it that? And we'll sort of talk through that as a group, but yeah, just play games. That's what we're all here for, isn't it?
Definitely, and that's all great advice. I certainly know that I rely heavily on a couple of particular chat groups that I got with my mates, and yeah, we're sort of that iterative approach to list design where you are tinkering with that 120 points or so that you got spare and trying to work on the maximum best use for it. Some great conversations. The next thing I was going to say was a bit of a random question, but what unit, battalion, or combo do you think is a hidden gem? Something that's not really talked about.
Okay, so I'll give you an example from weekend. I was playing against Bone Splitters, who, as I mentioned, I've had horrendous luck with in the past. And he set up a unit between Mysterious and Damned Terrain. So one of his 33 had 3 30-man blocks. So obviously he's thinking, well, I'll double down, I'll get the extra bonus from that, and then I'll re-roll my wounds. So I used Kairos to change that dice to a 1, which effectively pinned somewhere between a third and a half of his army in a corner. So at the moment, I'm loving that Kairos mystical terrain roll change, because a lot of people have never seen that one before, and I reckon that won me 2 games over the weekend as well.
Oh, that's great! You got it. Yeah, there are so many great Kairos stories.
Yeah.
There seems to be a group of people, don't know how prevalent it is, that doesn't choose to play OS without mysterious terrain. And well, I just find it, it's obviously their hobby and they enjoy doing what they're doing. But for me, mysterious terrain just adds so much to the dynamics and flavour of the game that I can't imagine playing without it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I say each to their own. I'd just say that you're playing probably 2/3 of the game without using it.
Yeah, and you miss out on great stories. Like I know one of our local gamers lost Gordrak and 4 brutes on the same bit of deadly. Just rolled 5 1s.
Yeah, he won't forget that one, will he?
Definitely won't forget that one.
Yeah, I also like killing my own horrors on damned terrain, so I can refresh other units and push them into better positions. Yeah. Using terrain, I think, as opposed to a specific unit. But yeah, the terrain, I I'd say using the terrain is probably the hidden gem in that respect.
Great. And the only other thing that I was going to ask, and I sort of can't resist this, given that I've now got you on the line, was that you obviously had great success with Death before switching to Tzeentch. What are you looking for or hoping to see with Death going forward when we hopefully get the sort of next wave of releases when they come?
When I started playing Death, they were probably the most flexible army out there with the summoning. Obviously, the points were much more fluid back in those days. And they played like a Dark Elf army. You know, it was hit and run, it was blocking, etc. And they've lost an awful lot of that. So I'd be hoping that they'd do something to redress that. A Death Lord's book would be absolutely amazing. It's a possibility because they've not got command traits. Or Death Rattle, you know, bringing in some elements from the old Tomb Kings. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've been burnt a little too often to really get my hopes up on that one. But I'll go Death Lords. I'll go Death Lords. If they can do that, I'll be happy, bunny.
Yeah, I think you've got I'd like to say you've probably got a fairly solid chance of that, but hey, pure speculation. But I think to give Games Workshop their due, with perhaps the exception of the Bone Splitter book, I think they've done a reasonably good job of making the armies play in a way, the Battletome armies play in a way which matches the fluff and story and narrative behind the army. So Sylvaneth, strong, tanky, absolutely. Hit and run, movement through the trees. It's got character. Death, its character lies in either large shambling hordes or summoning. Is the awful thing, unspeakable horrors of the night are going to appear, rising up out of the ground or from out of the mists, and are going to just take your guys out, and your poor humans or whatever are just facing these unspeakable horrors that can come from anywhere. So it'd be great if they sort of capture some of that flavour and bring that back into their gameplay.
I think Flesh Eater Courts play as Flesh Eater Courts.
Yeah, they do.
I think they've got that pretty much on the money. Yeah, it's just the others need a bit of fleshing out, and
no pun intended.
I think we lost a lot of character. Well, I mean, but I think was the sound effect. But they've lost a lot of character from the old Van Karsteins all going. You know, you think back in the day, Vampire Counts was the Von Karsteins, and they're gone. So yeah, I think they're missing a little bit of that character element and the outside of the Death Lords faction. Anyway, we'll see.
Yeah, I've got a couple of the old Vampire Counts army books sitting on my shelf, which I flick through occasionally. So it'd be great to see some of that back. Okay, well, I was going to round out the show with, was there anything further that you wanted to add?
No, I think I've covered everything that I would have covered off. Great, well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you, Tony. No, it's been a pleasure being on. Thank you very much for inviting me. Where can people find you on the internet if you want people to find you? I am at the Count More on Twitter, and on TGA or the Grand Alliance, it's Count More. Probably your best two places to get me. Great. Thank you very much. So just in terms of rounding out the show, thank you very much for listening. Hope you like this new style of Masterclass interview. I'm going to be hopefully bringing a few more of these over the courses of the coming months. If people have got questions, feedback, things that they would like to discuss with top tournament gamers, get in touch, let me know. You can get in touch with me either through the website, aosshorts.com, where you'll find all of the shows, show notes, useful resources.
or you can find me on Twitter at Antipodean7. That's ANTIPODEAN, and then the number 7, or AOS Shorts on Facebook. So get in touch. It'd be great to hear from you. Otherwise, bye for now. Cheers.